So then I think we can continue. First of all, thank you for coming by. Also, congratulations to your Java champion.
Thank
Uh,
you.
uh, and I want to ask you, can you introduce yourself a little bit for the audience? This would be great.
Sure. I'm Angie Jones. I'm a senior developer advocate at Apple Tools. I specialize in test automation strategies and techniques, and I'm the director of Test Automation University. So if you don't know how to test your code, come on over to Test Automation University. It's a free online platform with courses on all things testing. So if you need to test front end or back end or APIs or whatever, we got you covered. Mobile apps, all of the things. This talk is I'm going to use a test example. The title is a little bit misleading. I'm using a test example to show off like some of my favorite new features from Java 9 through 14, but everything that I talk about is applicable to whatever type of code we write in Java. So don't let the testing part throw you off.
Hi, I'm Angie, and I love Java. I teach free courses at Test Automation University, including a core Java programming course, Selenium WebDriver with Java, visual testing with Java, and a couple of others as well. While Java is still the leading programming language, it's gotten a bad rep over the years. Some of the biggest gripes I've heard are things like Java is too verbose, meaning we have to write a lot of code to do the most basic things, and that the language was not evolving fast enough. In fact, the releases of Java 7, 8, and 9 were all 3 years apart, which is almost a lifetime in software development. The powers that be have heard you loud and clear, and Java has gotten a much needed makeover. And now, new versions of the language are being released every 6 months, with Java 14 being the current release. With so many new features, it may be hard to keep up. So, in this talk, I want to demonstrate some of the newer features of Java and how we can take advantage of them in writing our code. So we're going to look at some automation code for verifying this banking page. And the specific test that we'll go over today is just going to make sure that all of the accounts here in this first column are actually listed as they should be. So here's our test code, and let me walk you through it. Here we are logging into the application, and we get a handle to this accounts overview page. This is where that table of accounts is located. Next, we get a list of the account numbers that are displayed on the page. And then we want to get the expected accounts. This test data can change, so we actually make a call to an API to get the expected accounts. And this returns a list of deserialized account objects. So we want to make a new list which will only contain the account numbers as strings as opposed to the entire count. We loop through the list of account objects and add the account number from each account into our list of expected accounts. Finally, we compare both lists to make sure every account for this customer is actually shown on the site. This test was written in Java 8, and we're going to go through it and see how we can modernize it using some of the latest features in Java. Let's start here with the declaration of the accounts overview page. As you can see here, we're following Java conventions. We're using good names for both our class and our object. However, many times, as we see here, these two names are actually the same thing. So this is redundant, right? It makes for a lot of typing. Fortunately, in version 10, Java introduced type inference for local variables. And what this means is that instead of explicitly declaring the object or variable's type, we can instead use this keyword var. And Java will infer what the type is based on what is being assigned to it. This is my favorite new feature in Java because in test code, we always have these long class names for our page models, and now we no longer need to type them out. But before you get carried away and start using var everywhere, let me explain the rules and also give you some tips. This does not make Java a dynamically typed language like JavaScript or Python. The type is still there, it's just inferred from the right-hand side of the statement, which means you can only use var if you're actually initializing the variable. Otherwise, Java will not be able to infer what its type is. Also, it only works for local variables. You can use this inside of methods, loops, decision structures, but you cannot use this for global variables, even if you are initializing them. While local variable type inference can be used within the body of local constructs, it cannot be used in the headers of methods or constructors. This is because whoever is calling you needs to know the data type of the arguments that they need to send. Okay, so those are the rules. Now let's get into some guidelines. Given this variable name and this method name, I have no idea what the inferred data type of X would be. Sure, Java knows because it's able to determine what's the return type of the getX method. But me, as the reader, I can't easily tell what this is. And this makes it really difficult to work with this variable. Now, you should always use good variable names, of course, but it's even more important if you're going to use var. Once you start using this, you're going to love it. But please, please, please don't overdo it. So using var here, for example, this doesn't do you any favors, right? Var is 3 letters, int is 3 letters. So you didn't save anything here. Just go ahead and type int here. You don't have to overdo it. Now I've updated our test method to use vars. So I'm using var here, and the inferred type is very clear to me as the reader because of the variable name that I chose. Here I changed the variable name from actual accounts to actual account IDs list. The reason I did this is so that it's clear that this is a list and it's holding the account IDs. For this one, I also changed the name from accounts to accounts list so that it's clear this is a list that's holding account objects. And here I changed the name to be more representative, but I also explicitly defined the data type of the array list on the right-hand side. If I didn't use this diamond operator to indicate that this is a list of strings, then Java would infer this as a list of objects, which technically is okay in this case, but this could get you into trouble down the road. For example, this is a list of strings, but if it's inferred as a list of objects, then when you try to use the dot operator and call one of the methods in the string class, you won't have access to them because technically Java just thinks that this is an object. So that's why it's important to explicitly declare that. And then here I'm using var inside of a for loop just to show you that this can be done here as well. Okay, let's see what else we can modernize. How about we look inside of this get accounts method? Remember, this is the table, and we're getting all of those values in the first column, which is labeled account. Here's the code to do so. We see here that it finds all of the account sales, and these are web elements. Then it creates a new list to hold just the text of the web elements. So this is a list of strings. To populate that list, we loop through each of the elements from line 3, get their text, and then add them to our new list from line 6. Notice this method needs 2 lists and a loop. Fortunately, there's a more modern approach to do this in Java by using functional programming style. This approach was actually added in Java 8, but I don't see it used much in test code, so I wanted to highlight it briefly. This is much more streamlined, I hope you would agree. And then here we still call find elements to get the list of web elements, but we don't need to store them. Instead, we turn them into a stream from which we can do some cool functional programming. This map function will take those web elements and map them into whatever is passed into this function call. Here, we're saying get the text from these web elements, then store them into a list which we return. Here's an alternative way to write the map call. Notice in the top example, line 5 uses a shortcut or a syntactic sugar, but in the bottom example, line 3 uses the fully spelled out approach. They both do the same thing. We can do the same in our test method as well. So instead of using the 2 lists in a for loop, I changed this to use a stream and map what I need into a single list. It's a good practice to break up these chained method calls where each method is on a new line. Now, I know it's really tempting to do this big, powerful call all on one line because it's like, wow, look at this wicked one-liner. But it makes it harder to read your code and it makes it harder to process what it's actually doing. And don't get me started on debugging, right? So it's a good practice to break it up so that each call is on a new line. It's more readable and it's easier to debug and to maintain. Okay, let's look at what's new with streams post Java 8. Well, Java 9 introduces a couple of new methods to stream, one being take while. Let's say I have this code which gets the list of accounts and then uses the take while method on this stream of accounts. Within this take while method, you pass in a condition, also known as a predicate. And this is saying to go through this list of accounts and accept all of the ones that have a type of checking until you get to one that does not have this type. So here are all the accounts stored in the accounts list. Notice there are 11 of them. And when we say take while the type is checking, we end up with a list of 3 accounts. And as you can see, it's the first 3 accounts from the accounts list. But when it got to the 4th account, the type was savings, so the stream ended. Java 9 also introduced drop while, which does the opposite of take while. For this one, we're saying drop the accounts of type checking until you get to one that's not. So with 11 accounts here, we see the first 3 are checking, the 4th is savings, the 5th through the 9th are checking, the 10th one is savings, and the last one is checking. So how many accounts do you think will be collected here in the checking accounts list? Go ahead, take a guess. If you said 8, you are correct. So this method dropped the first 3 accounts because they matched the predicate, and then it stopped the stream. So all other accounts are collected and stored into the list. And all of those accounts couldn't fit on the last slide, so here's a full list of the drop while account type is checking. So you might be thinking, why on earth would I want to use take while or drop while? Well, the examples I showed you were a bit of a brain tease. And that's because the lists weren't sorted, so the results were indeterministic. However, if you sort the collection first, as we're doing here, it makes a lot more sense. And notice I'm using this comparator to specify which property I want this object sorted by. Given the sorted list, we see that it in fact collects all of the checking accounts, and this makes more sense. Likewise for drop while. Okay, let's see what else we can modernize. How about we take a look inside of this Get Customer ID method. So this method is holding our test data, and based on the name on the account, it's returning the account ID. This is using a switch statement. And notice we have to declare the variable, then specify which case we want to handle. And inside of the case, we assign the value to ID. And then we must follow the assignment with a break statement to prevent fall through into the next case, which would override the variable. Not only is this a lot of boilerplate code, but it's also risky. If you forget one of those break statements, this will return the wrong ID. In Java 12, switch expressions were introduced. Now you can use switch to directly assign a value to a variable. Notice here, we're using switch on the right-hand side of the statement to initialize this variable ID. The case statement doesn't need a colon in switch expressions, but instead it uses an arrow. And this is saying if the name is John, then assign 12212 to the variable ID. Notice I don't need a break statement because there is no fall through with switch expressions. I can even simplify this a bit more by removing the assignment here and just returning the result of the switch expression. Now, using the lambda style arrows is one way to assign the value, but you can also use another approach. You can use the colon that we're used to, but you need to follow it with the word yield. This is a bit more verbose, so I prefer to just use the arrow. You can also specify more than one case. Notice here, we're saying if the customer name is John or Demo, which is his last name, then the ID is 12212. This makes up for the absence of fall through in switch expressions because you can indicate all cases delimited by a comma. You can also do more than just assign values. For example, here we're using the lambda style arrow followed by a set of curly braces to indicate we want to do more here. Inside of the body of this case, we can add more statements like this one. But the last line of the case must yield a value to be returned. All right, let's talk about some rules. You'll need to use the arrows or the colon yield. You can't mix and match them. So line 3 would give you a compilation error because it's a different kind of case than the ones shown on line 2. You can use yield with the arrows, but only in events like the last case where you're using the curly braces to execute multiple statements within a case. You can use any of the cases to throw an exception. So of course, in this default case, no value is being returned for ID because the entire flow is interrupted by the exception. Now, I'm using this exception in the default case, but it can be used in any of the cases. For example, if I wanted to throw an exception for Mary and throw an exception for default, then that's perfectly fine. Switch expressions are not a replacement of the switch statement. It's an addition to the language, meaning you can still use switch statements, and in some cases, it may be the more favorable option. As a rule of thumb, use expressions when you are using the switch to assign a value, and use statements when you're not using switch to assign values, but instead you're using it to invoke statements. Okay, let's get back to our test. How about let's go inside of this get accounts method, which makes an API call. So this method is making a get call to get all of the accounts for the specified customer. It's then deserializing the response into an array of account objects. Okay, let's look at the API response for this call. Notice here we have an array of these account objects. Each account has 4 properties: the ID, the customer ID, the type, and the balance. So I have this Pojo class that has nothing but those fields, as well as getters and setters. And for any of you who have created Pojos, which are plain old Java objects, meaning they just have fields and then getter and setter methods, if you've created a Pojo before, then you know that this is a tedious thing to do. And many developers have moved to using the Lombok external library so that they don't have to write all of this code. But fortunately, in Java 14, a new construct has been introduced called records. This is a record, much shorter, right? Notice here, instead of using the word class, we use the word record. Also, as opposed to opening this with a curly brace, we use parentheses to declare the fields, and you specify the fields and their data types in this comma delimited list. Then you close it with a closing paren and curly braces. And that's it. You don't need to make any getters or setters. You don't need to override the inherited methods such as equals or hash code or toString. It's all just done for you. And actually, it's done pretty well. However, if you just want to override anything or add your own methods, you can do so within the curly braces of the record. So you can add any code you want to there. Records can be instantiated just like classes. So account is the name of our record, and we use this new keyword to call the constructor, passing in all of the values. The fields of a record are final, so there are no set methods generated for records. Of course, you can add a setter within the curly braces of the record, but I don't see a good reason to do this since the fields are final and cannot be modified anyway. You do have accessor methods, however, they do not start with the word get. Instead, the accessor method name is the same as the field name. Notice the account.balance here as opposed to account.getBalance. Records were released as a preview feature in Java 14, which was released in March. And what that means is that it's not yet a permanent feature of the language. It's just available for us developers to play around with and offer feedback. And then based on that feedback, the implementation can change. So don't use this in production code just yet. What this also means is that support from external libraries may not be available just yet. For example, the Jackson library is used to deserialize that JSON response into this record. However, the Jackson library doesn't officially support records yet. So as a hack, you'll need to explicitly bind each field to its respective JSON property. And when and if records becomes permanent, I'm sure the Jackson project will provide support so that the explicit binding is not necessary. Next, I want to show you text blocks. Let's continue on with the API. What if instead of calling the API, we instead wanted to mock the data right here in this API util class? So to represent this whole thing as a string would be very tedious. We need to escape all of the fields because they were already in quotation marks, and we need to add new line characters for each line break, and we need to add the plus sign for each line. This is ugly. It's ugly to read and it's ugly to write. Text blocks allow you to use 3 quotation marks to open and close a big block of text. Notice you don't need to escape anything. The individual quotation marks are still there on the fields, and the line breaks are respected. Text blocks were introduced in Java 13 as a preview feature, and we got a second preview in the latest release, Java 14. So, this is also not a permanent feature just yet, but it is slated to become permanent in the next release of Java, which is in September. All right, let's look at some rules and guidelines for text blocks. You cannot include the entire text block on the same line. You'll get a compilation error. So a new line must be after the opening quotes, like in this second example. This is legal, but it's still not the preferred way. That looks a little bit off and unbalanced. So the preferred way is to have both the opening and closing quotes aligned, where each of them are on their own respective lines. Okay, one more thing I want to show you in that API class. Let's say we didn't want the entire response, but we wanted to just return a hard-coded list of expected account IDs. The old way of doing this would be to use the arrays.asList method. However, in Java 9, this of method was introduced for all entities in the collection framework. So lists, maps, sets, etc. This one seems small, but I've actually been enjoying this feature. And I think the reason for that is that it's more natural. Before, it took a cognitive effort to recall which class do I use to make a quick list, right? Is it array? Is it arrays? Plural? What is it? But now I want a list, I call list.of. I want a map, I call map.of. Nice and straightforward. Speaking of maps, populating these required a separate method call for each item that we wanted to add to the collection. Now you can define a map all with one line of code. So the parameters are key followed by value. And you can see here we have 3 entries added to the map in this one line. One thing to note about using the of method is that it creates collections which are immutable. What this means is that the collection cannot be changed by adding, removing, or sorting it later. So only use this when your collection won't require any changes later on in the program. So there you have it, folks. These are a few of my favorite new features from recent versions of Java. I've been using them in different projects and I find them quite useful, even for test code. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this nice, interesting talk about all those fancy Java features. There were some questions in the channel. I will just repeat some of them because I think they have been interesting. So the first one was you asking if people are using var. So
That's my favorite one. That's my favorite new feature, var, because as we all know, like these Java class names can get really long, right? Especially in test classes, because when we write in test code and especially UI code, we have like these page object classes, and so you name everything, and then you need also stick page at the end, and so it could get really long. And so this has saved me such a lot of typing.
I'm coming from a Groovy background. I enjoy it that it's now type safe in Java compared to Groovy, and I think it's a big benefit overall.
Yeah, so we get the type safety and the flexibility to use var. So pretty nice. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So just for the audience, if you have questions, feel free to ask. Now is the time to ask questions. There was a question from Dirk. If records will become value types once those are out?
Yeah, so they are They're a type of class construct. So you can use them like, same way you would instantiate any other class, you would do the same thing with a record, and that would be the data type of your object. So yes.
Okay. And Sandro asked how to change members in records. And I think he also, there's also an additional question from him. And he asked if you need to recreate a whole record if you want to set new fields. So if you want to
Mm.
reset fields or change fields.
Like change their values. Yeah, so
Yes.
the records are immutable, so once you create it, you can't necessarily change the fields. I did see some post on Twitter where some brilliant developer had some extra time on their hands and really explored some quirky things that you could be able to do, and they turned it into a builder class, which I thought was pretty interesting considering the records were immutable. So I'll try to find that tweet and tweet it back out or something. But technically, I guess you can if you do a little bit of voodoo magic. Um, but right out the box, not so much, right? So the records are immutable constructs.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, Dirk mentioned that you maybe can hack it in via reflection, but that will be quite hard, I
You
assume.
know what I mean?
Or
Yeah.
really, really dirty and
Yeah.
wonderful to debug afterwards. Debug heaven. So also Boris asked and answered his questions by themselves if text blocks do not support templating. And well, they support templating. Text blocks support templating.
I
You
don't
know
know.
that?
I
Okay.
no. What did he say? You said he
He
answered it.
say they do. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we learned something. Thank you, Boris, for that insight into that. Yeah. How long are you working actually with Java, and well, on which version do you normally work? Let's say that way.
I am fortunate enough in my role as a developer advocate that my job is to explore new versions of software and new tools and things like that. So as soon as they drop one, I'm on it. Um, if no more, just to learn the new features and play around with them. And so any development that I do, I usually don't work on feature development these days. It's more development to teach other developers is what I do now. And so I work with whatever is the latest one that's dropped. So right now I'm working with 14, and that way I can contribute feedback back to the project, because a lot of these features, as I mentioned in the talk, are in preview mode. So I can not just try it out one day, but actually use it for things I'm trying to develop. And that way I can get some more insight to feedback to the project.
Okay. There's also an interesting question from Sebastian. Which was the first Java version that you used?
I believe it was Java 2.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's actually when I got certified on the 1.2 was out.
Okay. I think I started with Java 7, so I'm really not that deep into Java, so I cannot say what was before Java 7. I thought Java 8 was a really big
It was.
jump, and that was quite interesting with all the functional programming approaches.
Yes.
And it brought us quite fun. The audience, do you have more questions, audience? Else I will continue with my chit chat. So I have.
I want to know because some of the folks in there said they were still on 8. Are you utilizing like the functional programming style of Java? Or are you still kind of doing things the same way? Like, are you using streams and getting dirty with the filtering and map and all of that stuff? Reduce. What are people saying?
That's a good. Yeah, come on, people. I've always find it funny because I think with Java 8 also the option, also the functional programming paradigms were also quite funny. And I'm still struggling with developers who actually, in my opinion, use the anti-pattern of if present and dot get. So they write conditions where they check if the optional is filled, and then they call
Mm.
dot get instead of map. It's quite funny, and it was, I think not all developers are already, even if they're on Java 11 or older ones, have really realized the possibilities they have with optionals and how they are really working.
That
That's
sounds
quite
like a
a
talk, Simon. You got us a new talk coming?
no, preferably not. But how do you see, how do you have also those so you as a, let's say, as a demo developer, because you said you're mainly developing for demonstration purposes and for learning purposes, do you encounter that quite often, and do you have a special way of attending those issues where people are not really familiar with the concepts? What would
Right.
you suggest?
Yeah, so a lot of times when I'm going over something, it's new to the developer, right? Um, so I usually learn from them too, you know. When a new feature drops, I'm not an expert in it. I've just explored it before someone else has. And so just like the question right there about the templates, and I'm like, I don't know, but you know, that's something I get to walk away with learning today. So I look at it just like a mutual learning experience. Let me show you what I read about it and what I tried out, and usually when I get questions, I can go back and play around some more to kind of answer those questions and then figure out like, okay, this is probably not a good pattern, you know, because when a feature drops, you don't get the list of, okay, here's the right things to do and here's how not to abuse it, you know. And so that's kind of something that I think the development community develops over time, you know, based on what they're trying, what they're doing, what they know from previous experiences, and how to best use it.
Okay. There's another question from Sebastian. He was under the expression that uh, the method reference class accessor is better than X. Uh, I do not know how X arrow function X dot accessor, because there's no need to instantiate a function on every call, but just reference an existing one. Is that wrong? Has this an
I can
implication?
go. No, I can go with that. I can agree with that.
Okay. So, and how does that affect? Is this something kind of memory footprint wise that a method reference is always better than a method invocation, or where is the benefit of that? Just out of curiosity, I'm not sure.
I took it as he was talking about the syntactical way that we were doing it. So instead of like the arrow with the function or whatever, utilizing like what do you call that thing? The colon to just make it cleaner and easier to use is what I was gathering.
Okay, so there's one interesting thing. Dirk seems to know a little bit more, and he says when you do a direct method access, it will be effectively compiled to a static method, uh, and a reference to that will be used then. So actually, you're using a method reference. How does that involve? So okay, that's a little bit too high for me now. Too late in the day, and this is my fourth talk already, so my brain does not work like that anymore. Definitely something I will read up later for sure.
Nice.
Yeah. Uh, cool. For me, also interesting because as you became a Java champion, what does that imply actually for you? What do you imply with being a Java champion now? What does that mean for
Yeah.
you actually? Because I think that's quite interesting. You do not have that often the time to talk to a Java champion, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So brand new Java champion, like as of Thursday. um, okay? So one, I was very excited. I feel like this is a very high distinguishment that basically is acknowledging my expertise and contributions to the space. More importantly than that, and what I really like about this honor is that, you know, just knowing your stuff is not enough. right? In order to be voted in, you have to have demonstrated basically community service within the JVM community, right? So more about helping others and giving back than just, oh, I know all the features of Java, yay me, and that's very much so what I'm about in my life, period, even without the title, is about helping other developers, right? We're all in this together. We all want to grow. The tech world is small. We'll probably cross paths at some point, and it would be better for all of us if we're all at the top of our game. And so I believe in helping each other out and helping the community grow. Java is my favorite language. Anyone who knows me knows I love Java. I code in other languages as well, JavaScript, PHP. I've done some Swift and things like this as well. Java is by far my favorite language. I sometimes say Java is bae on the Twitter world. But I'm very passionate, not about just sharing, oh, look what you can do in Java, but about keeping this language as, one of the top languages to choose from. And I think that the leaders and the developers of the language have done an amazing job with Java 8 and all of the versions that have come after that to keep this as a modern language that is still relevant to software development today. So I'm very excited to be a part of this group.
Okay. Dirk also asked if you have had the chance to celebrate it already, or
I am on lockdown. I do not go out at all. But inside of my home, yes, I celebrated, and virtually I celebrated. Twitter went crazy with the news, so did LinkedIn. So just celebrated amongst my peers and stuff on social media, and I'm tech girl, so that was right up my lane, really. So
okay. Now back to some more serious Java questions. So we talked about your favorite Java 9 to 14 features. What was your favorite Java 8 feature actually?
stream.
Stream. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was now a too short question. That's a too short answer. I did not have time to think about a second question. So,
Yeah, that Stream API is really powerful. I hadn't done any type of functional style programming before that, and I would hear the cool kids mention it with their languages and stuff. And so it's really nice to get that into Java. And I'm still not. I wouldn't consider myself a master at Stream. The Stream API is so much in there, and trying to remember which one of these do I use in which cases is still a little bit confusing, but I love that, right? I love that I'm always learning, even as someone who is certified and considered an expert in this language. There's still so much to learn all the time. I'm still Googling things all the time. And so it keeps it exciting, right? It keeps it fresh.
I have to say, I think you're not a developer when you do not know how to use Stack Overflow regular. Also, when you do not have to use Stack Overflow regularly. And what would be what is the feature you're most hyped about, or the upcoming features? So I'm pretty sure you're a little bit deeper into all those chat topics, and you still have some kind of awareness of those. What is the biggest feature you're looking forward to actually?
I can't think of anything that's not in preview right now that I'm super excited about. There's the new HTTP 2 that I really need to dig into. I like most developers have resorted to using other libraries, external libraries for API manipulation. But I'm seeing a lot of cool stuff in HTTP 2 that I've not personally tried out. So I think that's going to be something that's on my list to do pretty soon.
Okay. There's one question from Peter. What sources do you suggest to follow if he wants to keep informed about the new Java features?
Yeah, you can follow the Java account, of course. Also, what's this guy's name? It starts with
Brian
BBAE.
Goetz. Do you mean
No,
Brian
not
Goetz?
Brian, but yeah, Brian definitely. But
Okay.
Bail Dong.
Also
Um,
Beldong, yeah.
is that how you say it?
I'm not
I've
sure how you pronounce it, I have to say.
Yeah, so he does a really great job on his website, and I think he has other contributors who write there as well. But that's where I go a lot to see like the new features in action and stuff like that. So I definitely recommend that. It's BAELDUNG.
Dirk wrote it in the channel already. Thank you, Dirk. Yeah, cool. So I want to thank you. If there are not more questions from the chat, I would simply close the session because in a few minutes, Josh Long will be in here, and we will talk.
Yay!
We
I
will
love
talk
Josh
about
Long.
something spring is the title of the talk. So I'm curious. I think it will be about spring, but Josh is simply always talking about spring. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your talk, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Ascento Dev.
All right. Thanks so much, Simon. Take care, everyone.